Hey there everyone, and welcome back to the Green Developer channel. This week I want to do something a little bit different and actually jump into some code and give you some advice on something that I think is kind of underutilized by new developers when it comes to iOS development. This week I want to talk about how it's really simple to include things like spritekit elements and more specifically particle emitters to your apps to make them a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more interesting. I think that part of iOS development is kind of underutilized because as a beginner developer, it looks kind of out of reach because it's so different from kind of what you see and what you use with uikit normally. When you open a new window to create something, you have the option of either doing an app or doing a game. And I think for somebody that's just picking it up, you kind of don't realize yet that you can actually kind of mix and match both and actually make a spritekit element work the same way as how a normal uikit element works within your app. And once you understand that you can actually add those elements to a normal app, it kind of opens the door to a lot of fun things that you can add to your personal projects. Today we're going to take the example of adding a particle emitter to one of our view controllers. So you could see yourself maybe adding that to a weather app so you can have particles that show the actual weather that you're showing within the app. Or maybe, I don't know, you have a meditation app that has the sound of a crackling fire in the background or something like that. You could add a particle system that kind of, imitates the crackling of the fire going up in the air. Just a couple things that make your app a little bit more interesting, a little bit more dynamic, and if done correctly and tastefully and not too much, can just be a great way to set your app apart from other ones. All right, so let's jump right into it. Let's go into the code and let's write a couple lines, which is really not that much that you need to actually include that within a basic view controller. All right, so we'll open Xcode here and start off by creating a project. And as you can see, I think that's where part of the confusion comes from. When people might be starting out developing iOS apps, you create your app and you already have that feeling that you can either do an app or either use spritekit and do a game. But there's nothing really special about this besides the fact that it's a template and you can really easily use all the components that are found within that template inside of an actual basic normal app. So to prove you that you can do that, and to kind of show you how it can be utilized, we'll start with a completely empty app project. Call it like a particle test project. We'll still be using storyboard and uikit and skip out on using core data and tests as it is just a basic idea. Create this right here. Okay, so here's the basic idea of what we're going to do. We have a view controller that, kind of imitates whatever view controller you'd be using within your app. The only thing I'm going to do to that is add a spritekit scene within it and add a snow particle emitter to it so that you can see how it can be done. The idea being that you could be adding this to any view controller and add any normal uikit elements to it, like buttons, labels, etc., just to make it an actual view. All right, so first things first, we're going to create the two files that we need to add to this project. So we're going to create a new Swift file, call it our particle scene. Go ahead and create that. And we're also going to go ahead and create a particle file so that we can actually create our particle emitter that we can add to our spritekit scene after. For the sake of this project, we're just going to leave it as snow particles, but you can obviously tweak them and use whatever you need for your own project. Go ahead and create this. So I'm going to call it a snow particle. In this file, before we get moving further, we can do a couple changes. I'm not going to go ahead and explain everything you can do with particle emitters within this video. You can check other videos. There's plenty of stuff that explains how to use that. For our sake, we're just maybe going to make it a little bit wider and maybe have a little bit of a longer lifetime. And this should cover the screen nicely when we go ahead and actually use it. Okay, so now that we have this, we can go back to our view controller and actually start coding what we need. The first thing we're going to need is actually an SK view that we're going to initialize like this. And we obviously need to import spritekit here so we can have access to that content. Like I said, that's one of the small hurdles that you have to kind of understand to know that you can use particles and other physics elements from spritekit, is that This view works the exact same way as any other old label or anything within your view. You can add constraints to it so that it fits whatever you want on the screen. You can move it around, etc. It works the exact same way. It's just the content of that SK view is going to be something different than being a text. It's actually going to be a spritekit scene. But beyond that, it works exactly the same way. And so it's really easy to just incorporate it to the rest of your project like you would do any other thing. Now that we have that view, we're also going to set up our UI so we can position it on the screen. And we're going to initialize the SK scene so that there's something that actually fills that SK view. So let's write the functions for those. Setup UI. And another function to initialize our SK scene. Within this, just because we're using a snow particle, we're gonna set the background of this to be black so that we can actually see it. And we're just gonna lay out our actual SK view so that it fills the whole screen. Obviously, all the things I'm gonna be writing right now for the layout can be done within a storyboard by adding the same components and adding the constraints the same way and just linking them within your view controller, but I'm just gonna add them in code like this. So my SK view, dynamic equals false. Going to create our constraint. Like I said, just stretching it out to every side of the screen. View.top anchor 0. Our leading anchor is also going to be constrained to the view's leading anchor with a constant of 0. Same for our trailing anchor. Oops. Trailing anchor with a constant of 0. And our bottom anchor with a constant of 0. And then we're just going to activate all those constraints so that it actually fills our view. All right, so that should be enough for this. So now we simply have an SK view that actually fills our screen. And obviously, let's not forget, since we did that in code, this needs to be added as a subview so that it actually is rendered and added to the hierarchy of views within that view controller. Okay, now that we actually have a view within our screen, we can actually start setting up the SK scene within that view so that it renders what we want it to render. To do that, we're going to go to our particle scene, which is what is actually going to be filling the SK view that we added to our view controller. So in here, we're going to start by importing spritekit again, create a class particle scene, which is going to inherit from SK scene. All we need to add to this is just overriding the didMoveToView method, which is basically just the entry point to your SK scene. If you have any setup that you need to do, you can just do that in there. And it's the first thing that's going to be called whenever you open that scene. For the moment, we're just going to call this super to this so that no weird thing is missing out. We'll leave it like this for now and go back to our view controller. We have a scene which is empty for now, but we can still add it to our SK view so that we actually have it be rendered in our view controller. And since we're doing all of this programmatically, it's really simple. We just have to add an instance of the particle scene class that we just created and just present it within our SK view. So let's get started with that. Let's call it our particle scene. It's going to be a particle scene. So here we're going to use the size constructor and define a width and height to our particle scene. What you can do is just do 1920 by 1080. It's in portrait, so that's why I used width 1080 here. All we're going to set up within that particle scene is just the fact that we want to make sure that it fills the whole view that is presenting it. So how you do this is by calling particle scene and scale mode. We're going to use aspect fill just so that it fills the whole view. And then here's the interesting part. Like I said, since the idea is to be able to use it within a normal view controller and within a normal app, what will usually happen here is that you can actually set the background color to be clear so that you can see everything else and just render that on top of everything. And then at the last thing, so now we actually have a complete particle scene. What we can do now is call that escape view and actually present that scene that we just created. For our context, we just added it so that it fills the whole screen by adding constraint to every side of the view. And then we just added a particle scene to it and presented that so that it would fill in that escape view. So all that is left to do is just add that emitter to the particle scene and we should be done. So let's go back to our particle scene and call something like setup particle emitter. And let's create that function. Now remember earlier we already created a particle system file. So what we can do here is create our particle emitter, which is going to be called an SK emitter node, and we can just go get it from the file name, which is snow particle. We're going to force unwrap this just because we know that the file is there. If you want to be a little more careful, you can obviously do something else here. But for the most part, I think it's fine to use this. And then all that's left to do is to add that as a child node to our scene. We're going to add the particle emitter, and we should all be done. And obviously what we can add as a final touch is that since it's snow, we kind of maybe want it to come from the top of the screen. So we can just quickly take this and set a different position to our particle emitter. So add a point with an X and Y. And what we can do is maybe use the size of our screen and divide it in two so that it's set in the middle of our screen, and maybe take the height of our screen and I don't know, remove a couple from that so it moves more or less to the top of the screen. So let's try this. Let's build to any simulator and see if it actually worked. So there you have it, a nice little black background with snow falling from it. And like I said, I didn't really set the particle emitter to actually fill the screen, but you can just play around with that to find what you need. Like I said, this isn't like some kind of fancy game scene that can't be used outside of it. You could have buttons and whatever other elements on top of this. You could use transparency so it's behind those elements, and you can use it to kind of spice up your apps and, you know, make it a little bit more dynamic and interesting. So anyway, I hope this was helpful to some of you guys and gave you a little bit of ideas about how you can, you know, integrate that kind of stuff within your projects. I know there's a lot of new developers and people that are new to iOS that follow this channel. So this is kind of just to give you a couple ideas and you can take it from there and try to do your thing with it. Before I end the video, I want to remind you, if you liked this video and it was helpful to you, make sure to hit the like button. If you want to see more content like this, you can hit subscribe and that bell to be notified whenever I post new videos. And if you want to support the channel even more, I also have a Patreon that you can see at the bottom of the screen where I post all of my videos in early access and where you can get a couple other perks for supporting me if that's something you would like to do. Either way, I hope this was interesting to you and I will see you next week. Until then, take care.